Well, good evening, everybody. I hope you can all hear me. My name's Chris, and welcome to our evening discovery event with Nick Garbutt. I have a slight sense of deja vu because I vaguely recall being here some time ago. In fact, only a few days ago. Can you hear me, Nick? I think you probably can you?
Yes, I can.
Jolly good. Do you recall having done this once before, Nick, or is this the first time we've done this?
I think deja vu, as you say. I think the French have a word for that.
Very warm welcome to everybody. Thank you very much indeed for coming back a second time. As you will recall, we kindly ask that you keep your video turned off. And you keep your speakers muted, your mics muted, I beg your pardon. Nick, this evening we'll be talking about tigers, snow leopards and red pandas. And those of you that received my email will note that it's tigers, snow leopards and red pandas take 2. I noticed that Nick is looking a little bit different this time to how he was looking last time, because last time I absolutely certainly had a full head of hair. However, he tore most of it out whilst doing battle with his computer. So look, also on board from Wildlife Worldwide is Dan Free. Dan, as I'm sure you all know, is our wildlife manager. Dan knows India extremely well, has been to all of the tiger reserves, has lived in India too. And Dan and I will be monitoring the chat during the course of this evening's presentation with a view to having a question and answer session with Nick at the end. You guys, I'm sure, know the format by now because many of you have been online with us a number of times. I don't think there's anything else I need to say other than I shall leave it to Mr. Nick Garbutt and his nimble keyboard fingers. Over to you, Nick.
Thank you, Chris. Good evening, everyone. I'll just add my apologies for last week, and hopefully we will be glitch-free for the rest of the evening. So, as Chris mentioned, this evening I'm going to just chat through some thoughts and ideas about India beyond tigers to the mountains. If you're visiting India for the first time, it's on a wildlife trip, it's so obvious that you have to include going to see tigers. There is no substitute for seeing a tiger in the wild. I still think they're the ultimate animal to see in the wild. But nonetheless, within the last 10 years or so, so many more really exciting wildlife options have become available, particularly away from the lowland areas, the central Indian plains and so forth, and up into the mountains. So over the course of the next 40 minutes or so, we'll just introduce you to some of those options, but we'll begin with the classic tiger experience, because there is nothing quite to compare with seeing a tiger in the wild. And one of the things that makes it so special is the atmosphere in an Indian forest. This is a central Indian deciduous forest. The atmosphere, particularly first thing in the morning, is just so evocative. It's just one of the sorts of things that it stays with you, the sights, the sounds, the smells. It's an immersive experience. And so much of that additional sort of frisson and tingle that you get when in a forest, particularly first thing in the morning, comes from knowing that this one animal is there. And even though you can't see it, it may well be able to see you. And that just certainly sets the hairs on the back of my neck on edge and makes it utterly magical. And so much of that, for me, comes from my childhood recollections of the Jungle Book, obviously the wonderful cartoon, but also reading Kipling's story, and that just set my mind in motion with respect to wanting to go to India and see and experience Kipling's Jungle Book for real when I was an adult. And of course, then you might get the chance to see the real life Baloo. So one of the things I would always stress about any trip to a central Indian park is that it's not just about tigers. It's so easy to get rather blinkered and fixated on seeing one particular animal, but there's so much more to see, and getting a wonderful sighting of a sloth bear like this is just as exciting and just as challenging as seeing a tiger. There are plenty of things that you are likely to see on a regular basis, and one of the things that, if you've not been to India before, you would quickly come to appreciate if you were comparing it, say, with an African safari experience, is that you start to see the more common species on a regular basis. So this is a pair of barasingha, which actually aren't particularly common. You'd only see these if you went to Kanha National Park, which is my favorite central Indian park. This is an unusual race of barasingha that have adapted to hard ground. Most barasingha are a type of swamp deer, so they tend to live in very wet areas. But in Kanha, this particular population has adapted to much harder ground areas. But you would see on a regular basis on your safaris into the park, various deer species, spotted deer, samba, barking deer, etc., wild boar, and so forth. And then once you start to see those on a regular basis, you're then, of course, looking to get that magical experience with one of the top carnivores, the best, of course, being a tiger. And it does take time and effort. You need to put in the time. It's one of the fundamental differences with Indian parks, say, as compared to an African safari or so forth, is that all your accommodation is outside the park. So you're making trips in each day, twice a day, morning and afternoon. So the parks are much, much smaller than African park, and you're having to drive around areas on a repeated basis and listening for alarm calls, looking at tracks, pug marks, trying to piece together how, where the tigers are moving, and trying to second guess that to an extent, so you can try and put yourself in the right place at the right time and obviously get the sightings that you're after. But it does take time, and you need to put in the days to achieve success. You might be very lucky and go for 2 days and have sightings each time you go out, but equally you might miss out. So it pays to give yourself plenty of time, by which I would certainly say 4, 5, even 6 days in a particular reserve, or split between 2 reserves. And by doing that, you're just maximizing your opportunities to have a chance to see, obviously, what you're primarily hoping to see. And it's not just about tigers. You might see, as well as bears, leopard, whatever else. But obviously, most of the primary aim revolves around seeing tigers. And if you get lucky, you get really lovely sightings. They tend to be quite brief and fleeting. A sighting that lasts more than 5-6 minutes is an exceptional sighting, but they do happen. And again, it's about putting in the time so you get the opportunity. And then when you do get the opportunity, obviously you just have to absolutely drink it in. Whenever I'm leading a tour, one of the things I would always say to people, particularly if it's their first ever trip, is on your first tiger sighting, don't pick up the camera, just enjoy it, just watch, just drink it all in. Of course, everyone ignores what I say, and I can understand why, but nonetheless, it's such a special experience that if you are constantly looking through the lens of a camera, it will have been and gone, and you'll not realize what you've experienced. And you do have to work hard to get really good photographic opportunities. This, for instance, which is still one of my favorite tiger pictures that I've managed to take over 25 years on and off of visiting India, effectively took me 10 years to get. I imagined getting it, and then 10 years of regular visits to India passed by before all of the elements came together, all of the conditions, light conditions, tiger's position, speed of movement, weight was movement, all of those things didn't actually come together for 10 years until I was able to get this. But then obviously the gratification once you managed to get a shot like this was immense. Those of you with a long enough memory would recognize this particular tiger potentially. It was a famous tiger called B2, who was one of the dominant males in Bengal National Park in the late 90s, early noughties. And he died 10, 11 years ago now, something like that. Can't quite remember. And again, it's one of the things that if you keep going back repeatedly, as I've been lucky enough to do, you see the different generations in sequence. So sons taking over from fathers and then grandsons taking over, etc., etc. And the same with the female lines, which is obviously very gratifying. Of course, there is the inevitable downside, which is impossible to overlook when talking about tiger reserves. They're much smaller than African parks. So this sort of scenario is a problem. And it's a problem that recurs on a regular basis because people are obviously so fixated on trying to see one animal. So it does get crowded, and this undoubtedly tarnishes the experience. But if you pick the right parks where rules and regulations have been tweaked to minimize this, then the experiences can be so much better. As I mentioned, my favorite park is Kana, and one of the reasons is it's bigger, so there's more space. The number of vehicles in each zone is limited, and in recent years, a speed limit has been instigated, which in some other parks didn't used to be in place. And now that that is in place, it really controls how drivers behave, and they don't race around like crazy people, which they did at one time. So if there is a sighting at some point over the other side of the park, they can't race to go and see it. And when I was last in Kana, they'd also, the park officials, had also banned the use of mobile phones, which I thought was fantastic. So guides and drivers couldn't speak to one another and let them know when things were happening, so get everybody converging on one place. And it just meant you could drive around at a much more relaxed pace. And when your luck was in and you found a tiger, you had a chance of having it to yourself. And obviously that then makes the experience so much more memorable. And as a for instance, around a year ago, in fact, just about to the week, a year ago, just before obviously all the current situation started to really take hold, I was in India with a group, and on one particular morning had what was probably the best tiger experience I'd certainly had for 15 years. I mean, it would be in the top 2 or 3 I've ever had with this particular tigress. And we came across her. We were driving around in an area of the park entirely on our own. And we came across her. She was absolutely relaxed and was scent marking and moving around, completely unfazed by the vehicle. So we had her walking in and out of the woods close to us, crossing the road next to us, etc., for about 15 minutes without another soul. And it was just the most sensational experience. So all of these shots were taken within that relatively brief period of time. And she was scent marking trees and moving various places in and out of the woodland into the grassland, and really did not mind that we were there at all, which was obviously sensational. And even, you know, to get, I was just overjoyed to get a shot like this with that lovely intense stare as she's walking straight towards me. So that really did stick in my mind. And the folks that were with me at the time, who were relatively new to India and tiger viewing, I said to them after that very intense 15 or 20 minutes, how much they had to cherish that experience, because what they just experienced was so rare. And I'm not quite sure they took it at absolute face value at the time, but by the end of the trip, when their luck had changed and they suffered bad luck when other people had had good luck, I think they fully appreciated just how sensational an experience it had been. So if I was to just sum up the tiger experience in India, I would say the impact the animal has is off the scale. There is no other animal to compare with a tiger in the wild. But the wildlife experience sometimes is tarnished because of the groups, the size of the groups and number of people in the park. But with careful management and by you making specific decisions, you can stick to quiet areas and alleviate that. The photographic potential, yes, is challenging because the experiences don't come along, the sightings don't come along very often. And when they do, obviously there's a tendency to panic a little bit, and therefore, you know, it's not easy to get really good pictures, but if you do it on a repeated basis, it gets easier. And the wow factor for seeing a tiger, well, it's just supremely emotional, absolutely unforgettable. So I would certainly recommend for anybody going to India for a first time, they have to factor in going to try and see tigers. But as I mentioned, now there are so many more options available in India. And if you move away from the central Indian plains up into the mountains, 10, 15 years ago, there were very few wildlife opportunities. Now there are any number, and several of them are particularly unusual and offer the chance to see species that, as I say, 10 or 15 years ago were mythical, quite frankly. So this is up in northwest India, right on the border with Nepal, in Singalila National Park, which is in West Bengal, very close to the border with Sikkim and absolutely on the border with Nepal. And the Singalila Ridge looks across to the Himalayas. This is the third highest peak in the world, Kanchenjunga, and that range is often called the Sleeping Buddha. You can see why. And the foothills of the Himalayas here along the Singalila Ridge are cloaked in fantastic oak bamboo forest, which is prime habitat for red pandas, right at the very western edge of their range. And obviously hitherto one of the most difficult mammals to try and see. So this is the sort of forest we're dealing with, very dense oak bamboo forest, very difficult to get around, very steep slopes. But this is what red pandas love, because they're bamboo feeders, of course. So this is prime habitat if you're a red panda. And of course, that's the animal that everyone wants to see. And it's not straightforward, it's not easy, but again, with time and with patience, your opportunities now in Singalila are very good. This is where you would base yourself. A lovely little lodge called Habre's Nest, Habre meaning red panda in the local language. And this is right on the Singalila Ridge. And first thing in the morning, you get up, the experience, the sunrise experience from the ridge, which is, you're about 2,500, 3,000 meters, I can't quite remember, 9,000, 10,000 feet at the ridge top here. And the sunrise, that lodge, you get out of the front door and you're looking east towards the rising sun. And this is a sort of typical sunrise passage of time over 20 minutes. And just pottering around the lodge and the lodge area allows you the opportunity to see lots of bird species that you will be completely unfamiliar with from central India, because they're limited and restricted to the foothills, various places in the foothills. Lots of different species of laughing thrush. This is a chestnut, crowned laughing thrush, spotted laughing thrush, and a black-faced laughing thrush. And these are all skulking understory birds, which are difficult to see ordinarily, but at the lodge They have a feeding station and so forth, so it's much easier to get really good views of them. This is a fairly easy species to see, yellow-billed magpie, lots of those around the lodge. And if you really are lucky and hit the jackpot, this is probably the most spectacular bird in single either. It's called a satyr tragopan. You'd certainly hear them. Seeing them is much more challenging, but if you get lucky, picture tells 1,000 words here, doesn't it? Absolutely stunning, stunning bird. The morning experience at single either, staying at the lodge, does require a little bit of patience. Normally what happens is there's a series of guides, that a little posse of guides that go out at first light. You stay back at the lodge, they go off looking for the pandas, tracking the pandas, because early on they're sleeping, so they're not moving around very much. And then if the guides find a panda, they'll come back and fetch you, and out you go to wherever the panda has been located. And generally speaking, most panda sightings occur within 600 to 800 meters of the lodge, and some are much closer than that. You can walk further afield, but often it's not necessary to do so. But you do have to be patient, because the mists can come in, and that does make viewing a little more challenging at times. But if luck's with you and the trackers find a panda, they'll take you out and take you into the forest to wherever it is, and then you're allowed to sit quietly in a small group and watch the panda. Obviously, it may then wake up. You're hoping it's going to wake up, and then it's going to start moving around, so you get a chance to see the panda that's active. The people running the lodge are very, very good in that they're very conscientious about the welfare and well-being of the pandas. So if you have to go deep into the forest off the main trails, they generally try to limit you to 15 or 20 minutes of panda viewing, so you minimize the impact. If you get a panda viewing from one of the main trails, then you can stay with them as long as possible. And a lot of the viewings are from the main trails, but it's only when you have to sort of go bush bashing, and obviously to an extent cause a degree of disturbance, that they then would try to encourage you to leave after 15 or 20 minutes when everyone's had a good view and taken some photographs, just to minimize the disturbance, because these trackers have got to know the majority of the pandas in the vicinity, so they know which ones are more tolerant, which ones are a little more shy, etc. And it's all very much geared around being as ethical as possible and maintaining the pandas in as sort of wild a state, but also slowly allowing them to be habituated so they can be viewed in a controlled way. And when luck's with you, this shot was taken from one of the main trails. When luck's with you, you might get the chance to stay with a panda or even more than one panda for half, 3/4 of an hour. The longest panda sighting I had was 2.5 hours, because we were watching ones that were asleep and then got up and then went back to sleep. And I was just sat on the forest floor, and the pandas were completely unfazed by me being there. So when luck's with you and you get a panda that's habituated, you can get very close. I was probably 4 or 5 meters away from this particular panda when it came down the branch. They're very susceptible to twigs cracking and breaking. So it's a good idea that once you're sort of in place, that you don't move around and walk a lot around on the forest floor and have the potential to crack a twig or whatever, because that will send them scurrying back up to the tops of the trees. But if you're quiet and sit still, they're very tolerant. So this was the sighting that lasted 2.5 hours with these 2 young pandas. And if your heart doesn't melt seeing something like this, then your heart must be made of stone, quite frankly, because it's about as cute as an animal can possibly be. And this is one of the most sensational little encounters of any wildlife I've certainly had anywhere. And they were asleep, they woke up, they moved around, they came back together and snuggled together and then moved away again. And after 2.5 hours, we decided to leave and just left them to it. There was no need to stick with it. So I'll just finish off by giving you a little sort of overview of the lodge itself, because this is quite important, given that a panda trip to do it justice, you need to be staying realistically 5, 6, even 7 nights. So this particular lodge will be home for that period of time. And it's very small. What makes it peculiar, given that it's on the ridge, is actually the 4 buildings you see there are in Nepal, but the Land Rover and the track are in India. So the boundary is absolutely right down the center of the ridgeline. So when you're sleeping and inside the lodge, you are actually in Nepal. And some of the panda viewing is on the Nepalese side of the slope. Some of the panda viewing is on the Indian side of the slope. Obviously, the pandas move around freely. Borders mean nothing to them. So you can't really tell which side of the slope you may be seeing a panda. It's a very small lodge. It has a maximum of 4 double rooms and this small communal sitting area and eating area, but it's lovely, really comfortable. The rooms are small. That picture makes the room look quite large. It's not. So there isn't a lot of space out either side of the double bed. The bathrooms are really nice, hot water, etc. 24 hours hot water and electricity for charging, batteries, etc. So creature comforts, given where you are very, very good indeed. So I think the overall experience is excellent. With respect to other wildlife, that's more challenging. There is plenty of other wildlife in Singalila, but an awful lot of it is at much lower elevation. So once you're up at this particular lodge, it's really about seeing the red pandas and the bird life. You can go back to lower elevations to look for other species, but the journey along the ridge is quite time consuming. So that may or may not be something you'd choose to do. Certainly when I've been here, I've just concentrated on the red pandas because obviously that was the priority. So to sum up the red panda experience, I think animal impact, well, cute beyond words. They are just one of the most delightful animals you could ever wish to see in the wild. The wildlife experience, it's as much about the place and the space, and you need patience because there is a lot of waiting around at times while pandas are being looked for. But nonetheless, I think because of where you are, it's such an unusual habitat and one that you would find very difficult to access anywhere else. It makes it particularly appealing. The photographic potential with luck is good because if you get a good panda sighting and you're able to stick with it, you can take your time and eventually, hopefully, the panda will come into a position that makes it worthwhile to photograph. So the overall wow factor, I think, as an overall experience, it's incredibly intimate and it's utterly immersive. You get completely wrapped up in it. And it's particularly special, and it's such a contrast to the sort of experience you would have down in central India. So moving along, we'll zip further west in the mountains and go right across west and north up into Ladakh, right into the heart of the Himalayan ranges, to a place called Ulay, which is about a 3-hour drive west from Leh, the capital of Ladakh. So you're quite close to the Pakistan-China border here, within 200 or 300 miles. So pretty remote, but actually quite accessible in a sense. Fly into Leh and then a 3-hour drive. And you could have never imagined 15 years ago, if you remember when we all wowed at seeing snow leopards on our screens for the first time in Planet Earth, you could never imagine that that would become relatively mainstream as a potential wildlife tourism opportunity. But it is now, for those that are a little more intrepid and so forth. But it is a definite possibility. And Ulay is such a special place. You go to stay in a community right at the head of the valley. There are only 7 families that inhabit this valley. And the particular homestay lodge that has been expanded and constructed, given where it is incredibly comfortable, and commands one of the most spectacular views you could ever wish for. So if you draw your curtains first thing in the morning, this is the sort of sunrise you would potentially see. And I can think of few places I've been which are quite so breathtaking, to literally open the door, open the curtains and see that. So it commands an amazing position at the head of the valley. And as I mentioned, given where you are, is very comfortable. You know, nighttime temperatures here in the winter drop to easily down to -15, sometimes down to -20 degrees Celsius. But inside, you'll have hot water, and there are wood-burning stoves and heaters and thick duvets and so forth. So you can stay pretty warm. And it's just lovely, you know, on a sunny day, you come out and eat lunch out here with a view like that. It is quite spectacular. And the standards of service are just second to none. I mean, the people behind this have done a fantastic job putting it together. And what makes it so good, as I think, one of the perspectives, is that whole community has embraced the notion of foreign tourism, snow leopard tourism. So you get a chance to experience as a visitor what it's like to actually live in a place like this. And you're welcomed into some of the other homes and homestays to experience local ways of living, etc. So this is the wife of the head guide. Her name is Dolma, and she's cooking cambia here, which is a fermented bread being cooked on a charcoal fire, which you get at breakfast sometimes, and it's absolutely fantastic. And this is head guide Norbu, who is chief snow leopard spotter. And one of the things that makes this particular location so good is that an awful lot of the snow leopard viewing is done from the lodge or from the vicinity of the lodge. You only have to walk 100 yards to a couple of platform areas where the trackers and the guides are out with telescopes. And because Ule sits in a bowl, they're scanning the ridges all around on three sides, looking for the cats that tend to stay high up during the day. They come much lower down at night, but during the day they tend to stay high up around the ridge tops. So the guides are scanning for them on a regular basis, and a lot of the sightings that you may get while you're staying at Ule are from either at the lodge or very close to the lodge, and with cats that are higher up often. But you do also go on excursions away from the lodge to neighboring valleys to look for signs of cats and other wildlife. And inevitably, one of the first things you're likely to see if you don't see a snow leopard are signs of a snow leopard, the tracks of a snow leopard, because they move around through these valleys on a daily basis. So it's quite often the case that cats might be up on the valley edge, the ridge tops during the day, and then at night they'll come down and you might find tracks. These tracks were within 200 meters of the lodge, but the cat came down, walked through the area at night, and then was back higher up by daybreak. So I found it incredibly exciting just to think that I'm within an area where a snow leopard has walked within 100 yards, let alone actually seeing one. But seeing these signs is all part of the experience as you sort of build up to hopefully seeing a cat. And there's other wildlife to see as well. Your encounter rates with other species are much lower, of course. You're in the mountains, so densities are much lower. But there's always bird life to look for. Spectacular species like a lammergeier, which are relatively common up in the mountains, particularly around Ule. If you get lucky, you might see a piker. This is Royal's piker, which is the particular species that inhabits that part of the mountain ranges. And main prey species for snow leopards. So this is an ibex. And if you look closely, or not even look closely, you will see the marks on the flank of this huge male ibex. And when I was photographing this ibex, I noticed the marks, but really had no idea what they were referring to. And it was only later, shortly afterwards, that I was able to go back to where this ibex had been standing and actually realized that it had just escaped the clutches of a snow leopard. So those marks on its flank are the claw marks of a leopard. And this shot was taken no more than 5 minutes after this particular ibex had escaped the clutches of a leopard. And where the attack had taken place, we actually found chunks of fur of both the ibex and snow leopard. I even have a chunk of fur with a claw mark through it and blood on it, which I've kept. So to be so close to that sort of behavior, frustratingly, we didn't see it, of course, but nonetheless, to be so close was just amazing. But eventually, you know, luck's with you and you will see a cat. So if you look closely on the right-hand side, you can see this particular male snow leopard padding away and these blue sheep keeping a close eye on it. And as I've mentioned, ridge tops are always a place to look out for the cats. So this was a shot that was taken from very close to the lodge, albeit the cat's quite a way away. So I'm using a long telephoto lens, but nonetheless, it gives you an idea of the sort of sightings that you might get lucky enough and see. If you do get to spend time and get lucky, you can see them lower down as well. I'm not for one moment going to pretend that seeing them close by is easy, because it isn't. Most sightings you will get will be at several hundred meters away, and you're viewing through a telescope or your binoculars or a long telephoto lens. And once in a while, you might get a closer sighting where you're 300-400 meters away, and very occasionally even closer than that. This is a delightful sequence I videoed, I think 3 years ago now. So this mum is with a couple of cubs that are about 8 or 9 months old at this point. And on this particular trip, we saw this family 4 times, albeit at long distance. And then I was fortunate enough to go back to Ulay about 7-8 months later and saw the same family, the same mother with 2 cubs, and the cubs are now 16-17 months old in the same area, and they will have now obviously left and become independent, but it was a lovely piece of continuity to see the same cats in the same area with that sort of gap between. And as I mentioned, once in a while, you do really hit the jackpot and get a really close sighting. I've had 2 sightings that are as close as that, which was right at the head of the Ulay Valley. This was that particular female, and she was coming down to a kill she'd made that she was then repeatedly returning to each day over a 3 or 4 day period. So we were able to anticipate where she was going to be. And this piece of footage was taken from about 200 meters away. So yeah, it's obviously incredibly special to be able to see a cat in such close proximity, but I stress it's not something that you could rely on. It doesn't happen very often, but it certainly can and does happen. So it does afford you some really good photographic opportunities if luck is with you. Standard period of time that I would go and stay with a group at the lodge would be 10 days at the lodge, and then you need a little bit of acclimatization in Leh to begin with, 3 days of acclimatization. So a trip lasting just over 2 weeks, a snow leopard trip lasting just over 2 weeks, would give you 10 nights actually in the location itself. And within that period of time, your chances of seeing a cat are pretty good, and with luck you would see them on more than one occasion. I'll just finish off by just giving you a bit of feel-good factor about the way conservation and tourism are working hand in glove. One of the big problems with snow leopard is like large predators anywhere in the world, the conflict with local populations and particularly with local livestock. And the fact that snow leopards do kill sheep and domestic yak like this zoo has obviously led to a lot of conflict and persecution in the past. And one of the problems traditionally was that stock animals were kept in open corrals at night, stone enclosures, etc., that were very easy for the snow leopards to get into. And if a snow leopard got into a corral with 20 sheep in, it wouldn't just kill one sheep, it would kill all of them. Even though it wasn't going to eat all of them, it would just kill them all. So obviously that led to an awful lot of persecution and a lot of antagonism between local populations and snow leopards. And one of the things the conservation organizations working with snow leopards have done is find a very simple solution to alleviate that. They've paid for wire mesh coverings to these corrals and helped local communities install them. And as a consequence, in the places that these coverings have been installed, snow leopard predation on domestic stock has dropped by 90%, which is quite phenomenal for such a simple procedure. And as a consequence of that, the local communities are far less likely to persecute the cats now. Working hand in glove, they now realize that obviously foreign tourists like ourselves will pay good money to go and try and see cats. So in many places, the local people are actually now encouraging the cats into the area. They know their livestock is protected at night. They will have minimal impact on the livestock. And once in a while, if a domestic animal is taken during the day, the money from the tourism helps compensate local communities. So in Ule, for instance, there is a sizable chunk of money from every booking at the lodge that is donated to a community fund. Some of that then is used to compensate anyone from the community who loses an animal to a snow leopard. So there no longer is the resentment. And that, of course, has meant that the local communities have embraced the idea of snow leopard tourism and realized that it can work just as well for them as it does for the visitors. So in Ule, one of the additional things that the families do is make these absolutely delightful felt snow leopards from sheep's wool and yak wool and sell them. And they make a good additional sum of money each year from the sale of these delightful little wool sculptures, models, whatever you want to call them, as well as other things as well that they sell. So the whole idea of bringing people into the area has augmented their way of life and obviously massively benefited the snow leopards by reducing persecution and making them far less wary of humans, a little more tolerant of humans, which obviously then increases the likelihood that visitors will see them. So how would I sum up the snow leopard experience? Well, the animal impact, not surprisingly, is utterly awe-inspiring. Just the notion of seeing a snow leopard is still, to me, seems like a flight of fantasy, but nonetheless, seeing one actually for real is just stunning, of course. The wildlife experience is utterly spectacular, which is as much about where you are and the environment, the habitat, the location, as it is about actually seeing a snow leopard or the other species. The photographic potential, well, there's no hiding that actually photographing snow leopards is challenging and difficult, but there's plenty of other stuff to photograph. The scenery alone makes it photographically worthwhile. And if you're then able to get worthwhile pictures of any of the species there, the ibex, the birds, and hopefully snow leopards, that's a bonus. So the wow factor overall, being up at the best part of, I think you're over 10,000 feet at Ule, 4,000 meters. It is both literally and metaphorically absolutely breathtaking. So I hope that's given you a nice overview, introduction to tigers, red pandas, snow leopards. I think we're going to move on now to some questions, should any of you have any. So I'll hand over back to Chris.
Hey, Nick, goodness gracious, that was amazing. Really worth the wait. Nick, that was just absolutely outstanding. Thank you very much for that.
Good.
Really, really brilliant. Absolutely brilliant. Usual story. We have so many questions. The talks and presentations that we do seem to generate a staggering number of questions, which of course is absolutely fantastic. Both Dan and I have been responding to chat questions that have been coming in independently of one another. And I know we've both been busy throughout the entire presentation of yours. So listening with one ear and typing with the other ear. I don't know if you can type with your ears. Anyway, hey, look, let's get started. So
yeah,
I've tried to sort of group some of them together because it seems like the logical thing to do. First and foremost, I'm just going to ask you a couple of questions about the tiger viewing. I've had some really super questions on that, but if I can just chuck a couple of questions in your direction on that one. Dave Swan has asked, what reserve you think is the best reserve for tigers. I know that Kana is your favourite reserve. Is that because it's you think that's the best tiger reserve? There's a lot of cracking tiger reserves, right?
There are a lot of good tiger reserves. Inevitably, that's not quite a straightforward question to answer. It might well require the caveat of what is your priority. I would still put Kana at the top of my list for the overall tiger experience because of those rules and regulations that are in place, which make the visit much more enjoyable. And there's a really super population of tigers there as well. So I do think that's as good as any, without a doubt, as an experience and to maximize your opportunities of seeing tigers. And I would always stress that this requires 4, 5, 6 days as a minimum. But it's also worth considering places like Pench are very good. Mm-hmm. They too have the speed limits in place. Other places that have very good reputations for sightings are places like Bandavgarh and Tadoba. But they don't have the speed limit restrictions. So there are times the experience can get a little bit more, what should we say, questionable. They will undoubtedly offer you plenty of good sightings and photographic opportunities, but there might be times where you think the experience is a little more tarnished. Places like Satpura are harder to see tigers, quieter, but if you got a sighting in Satpura, chances are you wouldn't have too many people around you either. So not necessarily the most straightforward question to answer, and it might well boil down to how you assess your priorities. Is it just about sightings and photos, or is it about the overall experience as well?
That's fantastic, Nick. Thank you very much for that. A couple of other questions. You mentioned driving routes and so on. Question from Dave Caulfield. Are the driving routes controlled in all of the national parks? I know that certainly in 1 or 2 they're controlled.
To my knowledge, yes, in different ways in different parks, but most of the parks that I'm aware of, they're divided into zones, and the number of vehicles in each zone is limited.
Yeah.
And then within a zone, you're normally given a route to drive initially, and then after the first whatever it is, and this varies from park to park, let's say half an hour, whatever, you can peel away from that route and drive within your zone in any direction. But it varies from one park to another. So there's, for instance, there's more flexibility to do that sort of thing in Kana than say in Bandavgarh, where the routes are much more specifically controlled, and Todoba, as far as I'm aware, they're much more controlled as well. So you get allocated a route and away you go. Up in Rajasthan, Ranthambore, another very famous tiger reserve, has the route system. So once you're given a route, that's your route to drive for that particular drive.
Yeah.
And therefore you don't have any degree of flexibility, which again goes back to the necessity of needing to give yourself enough time. You know, going to a tiger reserve for a couple of days could be a recipe for disappointment.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I agree with that. Okay, look, that's super, Nick. Thank you very much. I'm going to move on to the world of red pandas. Rachel has asked whether you could just run through how you would get to the lodge. What's the sort of the process? I mean, how do you get there?
Okay, so it's a flight from Delhi up to Bagdogra, which is a very short flight, hour and a half or something like that. And then from Bagdogra, you would drive to Darjeeling, which on a map looks like a very short journey because it's only about 90 kilometers. But because it's twisty, turny roads through the foothills of the mountains, it's a 3-hour journey. You would then stay overnight at a delightful hotel in Darjeeling, which is an amazing place, sort of plastered onto a hillside. And then from there, it's a road journey of about an hour and a half to the edge of Singalila National Park. You would then transfer vehicles to Land Rovers, 4-wheel drives, to then drive from the entrance to the park along the Singalila Ridge to the lodge itself, which is about, if memory serves me, it's about 30 kilometers along the ridge. So that's another 2 to 3 hours of driving. So it's quite involved. And one of the reasons you have to have the night in Darjeeling, which is well worth it to see Darjeeling, quite frankly, but you have to have that, is that the park authorities don't allow people into Singalila after 2 o'clock in the afternoon, and there just isn't time to do it in one day. So it's quite involved, but from the moment you step off the plane in Bagdogra, you realize you're in a very different part of India, and that experience of going via Darjeeling and then to Singalila and so forth is all part and parcel of the overall trip experience. So it's very different.
And I was going to say it actually sounds as though it's quite involved, but sort of quite an exciting expeditionary experience.
It is, absolutely, it is, without a doubt. And this, bear in mind, this is a small number of people. The lodge only has 4 double rooms, so at an absolute maximum, there will only ever be 8 people there.
Yeah.
So the group sizes for our photographic trips are between 6 and 8, depending on the composition of the people booking the trip.
Yeah.
So it does certainly have that sort of feel. Yes.
No, that's brilliant. And Nick, someone else, Andy and Helen have asked, actually, not about the pandas in this particular case, but from Singalila, are there any interesting raptors to be seen?
Oh, good question. I think I have seen black eagle there, but it's tough. Birding in general is tough, and obviously once you're in Singalila, there are other raptors. I've seen shikras and things, but I don't think I've seen anything particularly mountain buzzard. But they're forest raptors, so they're tough.
Yeah,
they're tough.
They're
there, but I wouldn't for one moment say you've got a good chance of seeing them.
No, and of course that's not the reason for going, is it? Let's face it. I suppose it's just thinking about other things. One might be looking out for. Whilst you're there, there's
certainly plenty to look out for, but it's not something you would ever place a great deal of emphasis on. Place your bets on. It's not a great stall in seeing it.
No. Okay. So then the final couple of questions are about the snow leopard experience, and there are lots of people asking about the camera equipment and the lenses, and the distance away, and therefore distance away you are likely to be from snow leopards. I know there's at one level there's kind of no answer to that, but perhaps perhaps you could comment on that a bit. We've had a number of questions.
So just an idea on distance. The majority of sightings would be between 600 meters up to 1 kilometer away. So you're looking in telescopes or through binoculars. A smaller number of sightings are within that 400 to 600 meter range. And then a smaller number still, if you get very lucky, you might be 200 meters away. The closest I've ever been to the wild snow leopard was just under 100 meters away. But that was exceptional. So you wouldn't rely on that. So there's no doubting that most of the viewing is distant and through telescopes. So with regards to camera lenses, I'm using a 600mm lens, and I would say anyone who is going with a serious hope of getting images with digital cameras would need a 500mm lens at least, maybe with teleconverters or a crop sensor. The alternative would be digiscoping, of course, if you've got a good quality telescope, and then you can set up either your phone or a bridge camera on the telescope, and that works very, very well. So I would stress that it's an experience about primarily seeing snow leopards. Getting photographs you would regard as a bonus, but I've now done the trip with groups 5 times, and I've been 2 other times on my own to Ule, and I've yet to dip. I've seen snow leopards every time. We did have one group that were incredibly unlucky, and we only had 1 distant sighting in 10 days, but that was exceptionally unlucky. Most of the time when we've been with groups, we've had 3, 4, 5 sightings in a 10-day period. So I certainly wouldn't want to mislead anybody. It's primarily about seeing them, but there is always a chance you'll get lucky and get a good sighting that allows you to get worthwhile pictures. So it's a balance of expectation.
Yeah, of course. Nick, look, thank you very much. We have.
Pleasure.
I've still got questions coming in. I'm sure Dan has as well. They are. There's loads and loads of questions, which of course is so wonderful. I'm so sorry, everybody, that I can't ask Nick anymore. We would certainly be here at least until midnight, if not later, with all the questions we've got coming in. Nick, thank you so much. It's absolutely wonderful. Really, really wonderful. Your talks and presentations are always superb when you've worked out how to make your computer work. But no, thank you. Joking aside, really absolutely fantastic. Thank you to everybody, as usual, for being with us this evening. If you haven't yet got the Wildlife Worldwide brochure, the new Wildlife Worldwide brochure, please make a note of the details here. Go to our website and you'll get the new brochure with a rather snazzy baby elephant on the front. You'll be receiving an email from me in the course of the next 24 hours with a special offer code. As we have done, those of you who've been on these Zooms previously will know that you will get that through. Won't be this evening, it will be tomorrow. The next presentation is tomorrow evening. It's a bumper week for presentations from Wildlife Worldwide. The next presentation evening is tomorrow. That's with Helen Bryan and yours truly, talking about Baja California. And as I say, once again, thank you so much, everybody, for joining us this evening. We really, really appreciate it. And we look forward to seeing you again soon. But with that, I shall end this evening. Thank you so much.